Today it's when I was a councillor in that area. James's Hospital was in my constituency. Along with Councillor Tina McVeigh, we put in an objection to Bord Pleanála on the location of the Children's Hospital. It's quite a lengthy objection, but we did not believe the site was the correct one for the hospital, and that the scale and the impact was too big for the location and for the character and the scale of the area. And despite all the good stuff that's been said about public transport in and out of the hospital, it's actually quite a difficult area to reach, with bottlenecks on the South Circular Road, James's Street and around Canfort beside it. Now, one of the things we did manage to retrieve from all that process was to establish, Councillor Tina McVeigh established a residents monitoring committee, and she tells me today that the big issue at the moment is the structural impact on the houses in Canfort. Some of the houses are showing cracks in the walls, they rattle and shake during the impact of the construction, there's massive noise, dirt, dust and pollution, and the construction traffic is a nightmare, and the same will be true of the construction traffic coming down Davit Road from Drimna when we go into the future. All that said and done, and Bord Pleanála passed it and the hospital goes ahead. And then we, as the fellow said, we are where we are, and we get to where we are. And I think a lot has been said about the mess we're in, but I want to draw particular attention to the process of public procurement itself, and to argue that not just in the case of the Children's Hospital, but also in the case of broadband, it has been proved to be entirely flawed. And in 2013, under the government that Alan Kelly, the Deputy Alan Kelly, was a member of, when the Troika were in the country, it was decided that we need a public procurement officer, and that officer is still in place. Mr Quinn was appointed as the state's first ever public procurement officer, and his aim at the time was to save the public purse £500 million. Fast forward 6 years and look at the mess we're in. Look at the mess we're in with broadband. 18 million, in answer to a PQ that I put in, 18 million was spent on tendering out to find out who could we tender out to for the broadband. And we're left with one bidder, which has left us an entire mess, and looks like the rest of the country will be left in the dark if you compare it to, as the Minister is very fond of doing, the electrification process of this country back in the day. But what's really striking about what's gone on here with public procurement is that the public procurement officer is also a member of the board of the National Children's Hospital, but failed to tell the Minister for Finance and Public Reform that there was actually an overspend taking place. And then the Taoiseach in this House stands over that and says, if somebody is on a board, his or her fiduciary and legal responsibilities are to that board, and the correct line of accountability is from the chairman of that board to the line minister, not individual board members acting on their own part. And we know since then that that is not the case, and that Leo Varadkar still remains to correct the record of the Dáil. Finally, I'd just like to say that I think the next biggest farce in all of this is that the investigation is actually on the overruns is actually being carried out by PwC. There has to be a conflict of interest when there's a long-standing relationship with the main contractor BAM and a long-standing relationship with the HSE and PwC and the role that they play. We have put in an amendment to the motion, which we will be supporting if the amendment is passed, and that is to say that the time limit should be put on any investigation, otherwise we could have an overrun of time as well as money, and that should be 6 weeks. And I would just like to say that the government are behaving like Macbeth, the king who was afraid to step back from the blood he was up to his knees in, and it is about time that they pulled out of this and investigated an alternative.
Sharing time with Deputy Barry, I take.